O God, may your spirit and guidance be in us as we work for the benefit of all our people, for peace and justice in our land, and for the constant recognition of the dignity and aspirations of those whom we serve. Amen.
Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the N.W.T. Water Steward Strategy, guided by the Aboriginal Steering Committee, represents a shared path forward for water stewardship and prevention for the N.W.T. residents and water partners. Water partners such as the Indigenous, federal, and territorial governments, non-government organizations, research institutions and universities, regulatory boards, communities, and industry work together under the strategy to ensure our water remains clean and safe for future generations. The success of the water strategy is based on 4 main areas that requires concentrated efforts: working together, know and plan, use responsibly, and check our own progress. Examples of key responsibilities under each component include negotiating and implementing transboundary water management agreements under the Work Together component, implement research and monitoring throughout the Northwest Territories lakes and rivers under the Know and Plan, review and develop guidelines and regulations to clarify regulatory and environmental assessments processes under our responsibility, and regular reviewing and reporting of implementation of activities in our action plan under Check Our Progress. Traditional knowledge is an integral part of the water strategy, providing valuable information and important guidance for all stewardship actions. Specific actions on the importance and inclusion of traditional knowledge are identified in all 4 components of the water strategy. The next action plan to support the water strategy will cover the period of 2021-2025 and will build on the momentum we gained over the last decade. This new plan will address current priorities for the water stewardship in the Northwest Territories. As part of the development of the next action plan, we have worked with and engaged our water partners to continue to understand N.W.T. water priorities to ensure Northern voices are reflected. Mr. Speaker, we thank all those who have taken time to participate. Upon finalizing the next action plan, we will release a What We've Heard document will show how this important engagement informed the plan. Mr. Speaker, we are also making progress on modernizing the existing Yukon N.W.T. Transboundary Management Agreement signed in 2002. We've updated the agreement that commits us to responsibly manage shared waters in the Peel and Mackenzie Delta basins and develop a similar new agreement for the Liard River Basin. The new agreements are consistent with the water strategy and the 2015 agreement signed with the Alberta and BC. Consultation has occurred and public engagement ends on March 15th. We are now reviewing this feedback to ensure that it is addressed. Mr. Speaker, beginning last summer, the water levels on the Great Slave Lake reached record high, as did water levels in many rivers flowing into it. We know Northerners have questions about how or why this happened, and we're actively working to provide answers. Our government, along with experts from the governments of Alberta, British Columbia, and Canada, work together on an analyzing of our major shared waterways, such as the Peace and Athabasca River. We learned that these high water levels were driven by high snow and rainfall across northern BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. Based on this information, we anticipate Great Slave Lake water levels will not likely return to normal for a while. Current conditions are unprecedented, and what happens over the next few months will depend on several things, like the timing and the volume of precipitation, the time and the rate of snow ice melt in the spring, and the thickness of river and lake ice. Mr. Speaker, partnerships are what water stewardship is all about. This government is committed to working together to ensure that the water of the Northwest Territories remains clean, abundant, and productive for all times. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister responsible for industry, tourism, and investment.
Mr. Speaker, the season for planting may still be a long way off, but February 23rd was Agriculture Day in Canada, and we have much to celebrate and work towards in support of agriculture in the Northwest Territories. I will speak to the connection between the agriculture industry and efforts to strengthen food security. Despite the snow and still frigid temperatures, right now is, in fact, an important time of planning and investment for food growers and harvesters across our country and in the Northwest Territories. Mr. Speaker, as we mark Agriculture Day this year, the Department of Industry, Tourism and Investment is preparing to implement the 4th year of the N.W.T's agriculture strategy, the Business of Food, a food production plan. Since 2017, we have invested in planning, training, capacity building, community partnerships, and regulatory improvements designed to position our commercial agriculture sector to increase its production of fresh, healthy, safe, and more affordable locally grown food choices. The industry has indeed grown, and as recently announced, the Department of Industry, Tourism and Investment has responded to requests for increased financial supports for large-scale development on established and growing commercial farm businesses. 3 significant investments were made this winter in farms in the Hay River area under the Federal Canadian Agriculture Partnership. We continue to take stock of the progress that is being made by farmers and harvesters in order to determine what investments and initiatives are needed to continue the evolution and growth in our territory's emerging agriculture sector. Mr. Speaker, our government's first agriculture strategy was introduced as a means to advance regional economic development and diversification. But we also recognize that our agriculture sector can do much more than diversify and strengthen our economy. Our government's mandate includes a commitment to increase food security through locally produced, harvested, and affordable food. The growth of our agriculture sector is central to this commitment, and for the past year, the COVID pandemic has brought it to the forefront. Food security is an issue that impacts everybody in the territory, and for too many of our residents touches every aspect of their lives, particularly affecting health and education outcomes. It is an issue that rightfully is now commanding a collaborative, all-of-government approach. And while this work is being led by the Department of Industry, Tourism and Investment, we are reliant on support from the Departments of Health and Social Services, Environment and Natural Resources, and Lands, as well as our ongoing partnership with the Government of Canada. The Department has been working with these partner departments to consider how the N.W.T can better support food security efforts across the territory. In doing this, the Department has compiled an inventory of N.W.T food security programming and developed a set of considerations to assist the N.W.T in making meaningful progress on food security, and Health and Social Services lead on an anti-poverty roundtable focused as well on food security. All of these pieces will come together under a single document that we are currently drafting. Canada's Agriculture Day is an important opportunity to celebrate the growth of this industry over the last few years, including initiatives by producers to adapt their business to the pandemic. It is also a chance to highlight the rising interest across the Northwest Territories to think creatively about local food production, such as shown at farmers markets, community greenhouses, and especially our small and vibrant community of commercial growers and food producers. Together, these efforts support the commitment that our government has made to addressing food security. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister responsible for the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation.
Mr. Speaker, throughout the life of this government, I have traveled to many communities, and it cannot go unnoticed that every community in the Northwest Territories is unique and different and has different needs. Within 33 unique communities in the Northwest Territories, flexible programming is needed to ensure community needs are being met. The Northwest Territories Housing Corporation has a program to support Indigenous government and community agencies to develop innovative community-driven housing projects. Of their own design, the Community Housing Support Program works to ensure that local priorities around housing and homelessness can be met with a variety of support options. Mr. Speaker, flexibility really is key with this program. The Housing Corporation under this program offers support through grants and other contributions Supports may be in the form of policy and program design, material packages, technical expertise, land management, or surplus units when appropriate. Mr. Speaker, at this time, the Community Housing Support Program is supporting projects in 8 communities across the Northwest Territories. In Fort Smith, the Housing Corporation has completed a project with the Salt River First Nations that has led to the creation of 6 new affordable housing units. In this case, the Housing Corporation provided the material and the Salt River First Nation provided land and labour. In both Y.E.L.L.K.N.F.E. and Jean Marie River, similar projects were completed. 2 new units were constructed in each community, with the Housing Corporation providing a contribution for construction. Mr. Speaker, in Nahanni Butte and Fort Good Hope, the Community Housing Support Program was also used to create a community-driven housing repair program. Through these community management repair programs, community prioritized the residents that they think are in most need of repairs. Funding allowed them to inspect houses, create a scope of work, purchase material, and hire local tradespeople and apprentices to conduct this work. In Cova Lake, the community expressed interest in log homes, so the Housing Corporation is working on a log home demonstration project in the community. The project proposed the construction of 4 log homes in Cova Lake, constructed with funding from the Housing Corporation. The community will supply the logs, and we will contribute to the design, land development, and construction. Mr. Speaker, working in partnership with Indigenous governments and community agencies is a priority of this government. Partnerships like these, supported by Community Housing Support Program, are critical to making sure the Housing Corporation is working to meet the needs identified by the communities themselves. The community also works to ensure that supporting communities to identify their housing priorities through the establishment of community housing plans. The Community Housing Support Program is a key role and has a tool to play in supporting communities to address their housing aspirations. I'm looking forward to seeing the results of these partnerships and what the next innovative, locally driven projects are that grows from this innovative approach. Must see, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements, member statements, member for Tunde Wilde.
Masicho, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about N.W.T's Emergent Wisely plan today. This document, which was released last spring in May, laid out our government's plan on how to deal with the pandemic response. First off, I want to say what a great job our medical teams have done in mitigating the spread of this virus. And a big masicho to all our residents who have done their part by following all the current restrictions. At the moment, we have 0 active cases, and this is definitely something to be very proud of. Mr. Speaker, since last spring, a lot has happened. This pandemic is a fluid situation, and there are new developments happening daily. Over the last year, we have made some great strides in terms of vaccination development and delivery. However, we also now have to worry about the variant strains of this disease that have emerged around the world. Mr. Speaker, as of March 26, according to the Department of Health and Social Services, the N.W.T has now administered a total of 23,722 first doses of the Moderna COVID-19 vaccination. Again, great job to the medical teams. And that number we're starting to closely creep up to that herd immunity number. I think one of my colleagues will be speaking on that today later. Mr. Speaker, the Emergency Wisely document released last year simply says a vaccine needs to be available to a large portion of our residents. Northerners so far have done their part to battle this disease. So what is our direction moving forward in terms of relaxing the restrictions? Mr. Speaker, I'll have questions for the Minister of Health and Social Services at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Tunde Wilde. Member statements, member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on March the 11th, 2021, the Minister of Health and Social Services made an announcement regarding long-term care, bed projections for the N.W.T. Minister Green explained that the Department of Health had updated its data stream and worked with the Bureau of Statistics to redo the estimate of long-term beds needed for the N.W.T. over the next 14 years. They concluded that the N.W.T. does not require as many new long-term beds as they initially thought in 2015. Mr. Speaker, as a result of this new estimate, the department also created a new prediction model to determine a new number of long-term care beds required in each N.W.T. region. This new projection model has determined that the demand for the long-term beds in Fort Smith is greater than previous estimates. Therefore, the department has concluded that more long-term beds will now be built for Fort Smith. Mr. Speaker, Fort Smith currently has 26 long-term beds in our community. However, this new projection by the government will create another 24 new long-term beds for Fort Smith. This is a much-needed boost of infrastructure that will greatly benefit Fort Smith and the South Slave for many years to come. Mr. Speaker, I was very happy to hear this news from Minister Green. The people of Fort Smith are also very happy with this decision. In fact, I'd like to share an excerpt from a letter I received yesterday from the president of the Fort Smith Senior Citizen Society, Ms. Mary Pat Short, who said, "The Fort Smith Senior Citizen Society wishes to thank Minister Green for a decision to award a 24-bed extended care facility to Fort Smith. In Fort Smith, we have a large and steadily growing population of seniors. As each year passes, more of our seniors need the specialized care that an extended care facility makes possible. The facility will benefit our current and future elders, and on their behalf, the Fort Smith Senior Society expresses our deepest gratitude." Mr. Speaker, may I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement?
Thank you. The members seeking unanimous consent to conclude their statements. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, the N.W.T. Senior Society President, Mr. Don Webb, who is a Fort Smith resident, has told me verbally that he is also very grateful for the new long-term beds coming to Fort Smith. In addition, the entire community of Fort Smith wants to thank Minister Green and the Cabinet for the decision. As the MLA for Thabatcha, I too wish to thank Minister Green and the Cabinet for implementing the renewal strategy in this decision. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Thabatcha. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to start off today by thanking teachers for taking my kids back today. Second, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Health Authority as they've done an incredible job vaccinating N.W.T. residents and continues to do so. As we work towards 75% vaccination rate, N.W.T. residents are wondering how this change to public health orders here in the Northwest Territories. While some question what this means for self-isolation, many N.W.T. businesses and residents are asking what this means for within-territory restrictions. In a recent letter to the Premier, the N.W.T's Yellowknife Chamber of Commerce asked the GNWT to provide transparent criteria and metrics to give businesses the information required to plan their operations over the coming months. Within the N.W.T, the letter specifically asks about removing capacity restrictions on outdoor gatherings and increasing indoor capacity limits. Mr. Speaker, businesses need time to rehire and train staff as well as purchase additional inventory to accommodate changes to public health restrictions. Scrambling to adapt means increased operating costs or the inability to adjust in time for seasonal work. N.W.T. businesses have been adaptive, responsive, and responsible and need the government's support through transparent guidelines to continue to put Northerners' safety first while preserving their own ability to stay afloat. Mr. Speaker, the Chamber also raises concerns about case-by-case business exemptions. This approach does not provide clarity or certainty for businesses, is inefficient, and lacks transparency and accountability. I also feel this increases administrative burden for N.W.T. businesses and creates a system where those with the capacity to advocate for themselves end up with different rules. The N.W.T's race for herd immunity and where its finish line truly lies is unclear. While we measure our success as a territory, not all 33 communities will achieve 75% vaccination rate at the same time. Given our vaccination success is based on the personal choices of our adult population, some communities may never achieve true herd immunity, and understanding the consequences of this is important to the mental health and economic potential of our territory. Residents and businesses want to support the G&W-T's efforts to keep Northerners safe. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
Thank you. The member seeking unanimous consent to conclude your statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Residents and businesses want to support the G&W-T's efforts to keep Northerners safe, but this partnership hinges on open communication that supports both the physical and mental health as well as the economic needs of Northerners. Let's give Northerners the opportunity to emerge wisely by working to identify clearer goalposts, rewards, and economic supports. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Cam Lake. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. It's tax time again. That's especially important for recipients of income assistance who are required to file tax returns in order to remain eligible. Case officers keep an eye on what tax refunds their clients might be getting. Refunds are considered unearned income, and the amount of a refund is deducted from the client's monthly amount of income support, even if part of the refund is used to pay off other tax debts. There is an especially cruel twist to this year, thanks to COVID, and the Federal Canada Emergency Response Benefit, or CERB. When CERB was introduced, many Canadians who weren't really eligible claimed the benefit. Now many of them are being made to pay it back. To ensure that no one went without income during the pandemic, G&W-T did not claw back or reduce income assistance from April 1st to 2020 to at least December 31st, 2020, even if you got CERB payments. For those who received CERB but were not eligible, one way the federal government is collecting those debts is by garnishing the tax refunds of people who are not eligible. However, ECE is considering the amount of garnishee to be unearned income and deducting it from the monthly eligibility for income assistance. In some cases, this reduces the amount of the tax refund itself to zero. So some income assistance recipients are receiving no tax refund and then get less monthly income assistance because ECE is deducting the amount of the garnishee. When anti-poverty advocates raise this problem of deducting garnishees from income assistance, the Minister of ECE says he's handcuffed by the income assistance regulations. He says that tax refunds are counted as income, so even though the refund is reduced or amounts to zero, the person is getting a benefit because the garnishee is paying down their debt. How does this practice encourage responsible financial management? I've read the regulations and I think the Minister has discretion for leniency, especially during this extraordinary pandemic. I'll have questions for the Minister on why people who should lose part of their measly income assistance as a penalty for money they were supposed to be able to keep in the first place. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Responding to COVID-19 has been hugely challenging for our territory and the world. It has changed the way we socialize, work, and live our lives. Northerners have been quick to adapt, and everyone deserves credit for their efforts. As a result of our swift and aggressive response to COVID-19 through the implementation of strict public health measures and border restrictions, the N.W.T has been the most successful in containing the spread of COVID-19 in Canada. And, according to Emerging Wisely, the need to gradually and safely ease our restrictions has always been part of the plan. As COVID response technology is improving and becoming more available, it is time to develop a strategy to emerge from our bubble. In engineering, we recognize that no project can ever be designed to 100% safety, as the cost is too high and the design generally impractical. Likewise, when it comes to the N.W.T and COVID, the cost for 100% safety has been our economic and mental health. Measures have been in place for over a year. Travel restrictions, self-isolation protocols, and physical distancing are our reality. The cost of this new reality has been the loss of small business, an increase in substance abuse, and greater incidence of violence and mental health issues. What this is telling us is that we need to strike a better balance between managing the risk of importing the virus from outside the territory and allowing people to be with their friends and family and businesses to operate. We should be exploring options such as requiring travelers to produce negative COVID test results upon arrival. This could be then followed by a shorter isolation period, after which a second negative COVID test would be taken to clear the individual. While this may seem risky, it is a calculated risk that we must be willing to take. If we choose to continue to accept a very low risk of COVID infections, we are choosing to accept mental health, addictions, and domestic violence issues. Residents need access to Southern family. Many grandparents have yet to meet their grandchildren. People shouldn't have to make choices between their job and being with a dying parent, or between cancer treatment and the fear of isolation. Stigma, fear, and adapting healthcare system are causing people to go undiagnosed and untreated for illness. I recognize navigating a global pandemic, especially while many jurisdictions are heading into a third wave, is a complex challenge. Therefore, I urge utilizing a science-based approach to easing restrictions with clear criteria, dates, and key milestones so we can create a balance between the risk of COVID infection while protecting people from social harm and saving the economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in December of 2015, a final report titled Northwest Territories Long-Term Care Program Review was submitted to the Department of Health and Social Services. The report, some 288 pages, based on statistics and relevant data available at the time, identified requirements for long care facilities throughout the Northwest Territories. On March 11th of this year, the Minister of Health tabled a 17-page document that confirmed a substantial reduction in projected long-term care beds needs identified in the 2015 report, not only for Hay River, but for the N.W.T. as a whole. Mr. Speaker, in 2015, 48 beds were identified for Hay River, which included Enterprise and N.W.T. First Nation. Both reports appear to have overlooked the communities of Fort Resolution, Fort Providence, and Kikiza, which combined represent an additional population of 1,400 people and are in the Hay River catchment area. Mr. Speaker, upon review of the reports, I have concluded that through the use of statistical information only, projections can be skewed to meet the department's objectives of the day. Compared to the most current analysis, the 2015 analysis was comprehensive and looked beyond statistics by considering the tangible and intangible uniqueness of the N.W.T. It looked at a demonstrated higher incidence of chronic diseases, lack of available and appropriate housing, limited and necessary supporting community-based infrastructure, all which contribute to a higher rate of institutionalization in the N.W.T. as compared to Canada as a whole. Mr. Speaker, the department in the most recent analysis of extended care beds makes the point of having seniors age in place through more effective home care services. To accomplish this, the Minister of Health stated that the department is committed to improving supports by looking to clients, families, communities, government, and non-government agencies to assist. This sends a message to me that the government is looking for a way to offload responsibilities to an already taxed NGO sector, underfunded communities, and families who may not be in a position to offer 24-hour care. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
Thank you. Members seeking unanimous consent to conclude a statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, other than recommendations from the N.W.T. Home and Community Care report dated September 26, 2019, I have not seen, in support of its intent to reduce the number of long care beds for Hay River, a substantive action plan from the department that establishes how it will achieve effective home care for Hay River or throughout the N.W.T. As it stands now, there is no additional dollars, infrastructure, or identified staff increases to support that objective. Mr. Speaker, the argument for reducing the number of beds for Hay River is weak at best. I would recommend that the department stay on track and complete the 48-bed facility in Hay River. If other communities, such as Fort Smith, require additional beds, then let us look at making that happen in the near future, but not at the expense of Hay River and the surrounding communities we serve. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Hay River South. Member statements. Member statements. Member for the N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, back from our, I guess, 2-week break from, I just want to thank being home for the last 2 weeks. You see how hard the people are working in our communities, our frontline staff. I really want to thank our school teachers, and because we had a shorter break in the N.W.T. so they could go home earlier this year. Our RCMP staff and our health center, and I'd like to thank the mayors and councillors, Tuck Community Corporation and Paultuck Community Corp in Sax Harbor. Also our elders committees who are working so hard, in our local DEAs, our IRC, for helping with all the suicide prevention workshops that they're doing in the Beaufort Delta. I really thank them for that, and they really step up. I'd like to thank our government and the federal government for helping and assisting in getting funding to make things happen while we're in these COVID-19 days. I also want to thank all our recreation staff that have been keeping our youth busy and occupied at night in our youth centers. And I just want to thank everybody for all the hard work. It's not going unseen. I would really appreciate all the hard work that they're doing. And I really would like to thank our elders, because we're losing so many elders, Mr. Speaker. We had another death in our community of Tuck. We lost another really well-respected elder. We had 4 or 5 deaths in our community, and keep our community in the N.W.T. in prayers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for the N.W.T. Our thoughts and prayers are with the community and family this time. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Yellowknife North.
Mr. Speaker, nurses are the backbone of our healthcare system. And across Canada, we face a nursing shortage, and the market is highly competitive to attract and retain nurses. We in the North have long struggled to fulfill all of our nursing positions. This last year has shown just how important our healthcare workers are. Our pandemic response was informed by our ability to manage the threat, and we took no chances, Mr. Speaker. However, we need to take that bold spirit to attracting and retaining our nurses. Mr. Speaker, I have had many exhausted nurses reach out to me over the course of this pandemic, offering solutions and looking for change. Mr. Speaker, I believe we need to reintroduce service agreements, offering incentives to continue employment in the North. We rely on locums to a great extent in the North. However, at some point, when it is more attractive to be a Southern resident nurse than it is to be a local one, many seize that opportunity and look for more flexible hours and higher pay. Mr. Speaker, we need to offer better training opportunities for our nurses who want to stay. We need to build on the success of the Aurora College nursing program, one of our best programs that has led to many great local nurses. But we need to then allow those nurses to further specialize in different fields. Many of those specialized positions are filled by locums presently, and increased training opportunities would work to solve both of those issues, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, by doing this, our local nurses, particularly in remote communities, will stay longer. They will have a stronger connection to our communities, and the culture in our healthcare system will build to retain our nurses. Presently, one of the biggest reasons our nurses leave is workplace culture and burnout. We need to offer more flexible working hours, increase part-time options for nurses, allow nurses to come back from retirement should they wish. We can't make it a binary of forcing nurses to either burn out or leave. Mr. Speaker, I know this is a priority of this House, and the department knows it too, but we need to take that spirit that we applied to COVID-19 and focus on retaining the nurses we have to make sure our health system capacity remains. I believe our situation is actually getting worse, Mr. Speaker. We risk a downward spiral where more nurses leave for other markets, making the current nurses work more overtime, causing more to leave. We need to commit to serious action to ending such a spiral. I'll have questions for the Minister of Health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Yellowknife North. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Mumfui.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, today the summer is coming up. You know that from the road between the Ray Junction, that road hasn't worked on for over 30 years. Last summer, they're working on it on the contract. It's been over 30 years. The road hasn't been worked on, so I'd like to talk about the road contract between.
Is just around the corner. So my statement today is about the reconstruction of Bishop Cone Access Road. Mr. Speaker, it's been well over 30 years since the construction of a road from Ray Junction to Ray. Just last summer, this is a 3-year public works project to smooth out and strengthen the 10-kilometer road that is Bishop Cone connections to the outside world. It's finally in progress. The people of Bishop Cone were pleased to see the work started last spring and are eager for the completion in 2023. But, Mr. Speaker, they are not pleased with the community's share of local jobs and business opportunities. Sadly, this road project seems to be the ongoing issue or way of many construction projects that promise local benefits and fail to deliver. Mr. Speaker, have we delivered on what was agreed upon last summer with a contractor and the summer 2021 that's coming up? So I will have questions for Minister of Infrastructure at the appropriate time, Mr. Speaker. Merci.
Thank you, member for Mumfui. Member statements. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Minister responsible for the public. Oh, sorry. That's the wrong heading there. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Acknowledgements. Acknowledgements. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The questions are for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, the Minister confirmed that new bed projections were based on 10 years of statistical information versus 5 that went into the 2015 report. Can the Minister confirm what statistical evidence was considered in developing the N.W.T's long-term bed requirements? Because I have a difficult time believing so much has changed in 5 years when our population has a minimal change overall. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Hay River South. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the member for Hay River South for that question. What has changed is a greater amount of data about actual use has allowed us to quantify the age and stage of the people who are entering long-term care facilities. So we have actual information to rely on. In 2015, those were truly projections based on bed ratios for age. So what we have now is actual versus projected, and that's why those two numbers are different, what was required in 2015 and what was required in 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the N.W.T has issues such as lack of housing, addictions, effects of residential schools, and others. Compared to the rest of Canada, these issues negatively impact delivery of extended care and home care support due to our relatively small population. So what I'd ask the Minister, what, if any, consideration was given to the uniqueness of northern health issues during the recent review process for determining long-term bed requirements for Hay River? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Hay River South. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my understanding that in doing that report, the Bureau of Statistics looked at issues such as the age of people going into long-term care, what their health status was going into long-term care, how much time they spent in long-term care, which community they were from, and which community they went into long-term care in, which are sometimes different. So they looked certainly at the comorbidities, as we say, more than one chronic disease that drives people into the requirement for more high-level nursing care and thus into long-term care. So I feel confident that the health of the population was a primary consideration in looking at the bed needs going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that many of our NGOs, families, and support networks are taxed to the breaking point, yet this government wants to try and squeeze a little more out of them. Can the Minister confirm if the Department, during its reassessment of its long-term bed requirements, talked to those community organizations currently supporting long-term and home care clients, and to what extent was that conversation? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Haver South. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my understanding that the consultation on the new bed projections is about to begin next month with, in fact, a trip to Hay River to talk to people there about the findings and to verify those numbers on the ground. So we have not done that in advance. The study that was done done by the Bureau of Statistics, and so they are not using qualitative information. They're using quantitative information about the size of the population, the health of the population, where they live, and so on and so forth. So that's not the kind of document that we would normally expect them to consult on. We just ask them to produce the numbers, and that's what they did. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't really like to say it, but it appears that the process and conclusions were conceived in Yellowknife by bureaucrats with no or limited input from stakeholders, which it sounds like happened. And I'm glad to hear, though, that the department will be going out. So I guess I'd ask the minister that with what once the consultation takes place, and if it, we may see a change. We may see that maybe Hay River only needs 24 beds. We may see that maybe Fort Smith only needs 12 beds. We may see that we need 36, 64, I don't know, versus the 48 initially proposed. But whatever the answer, the analysis has to be done right. It has to take into consideration what the community needs, and for Hay River, it would be surrounding communities, which there are 5 of them. So I guess I'd ask the minister if she would at least commit her department to during the reassessment to really consider Hay River and the area that we do serve and the needs of the people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Haver South. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to just say a word about the catchment area for Hay River. Kakiza and Fort Providence are within the Decho Health and Social Services Authority area, and so generally speaking, they are served out of Fort Simpson, which is the headquarters for that authority. Fort Resolution is within the Yellowknife Health and Social Services Authority, so they are served from Yellowknife. So the Hay River long-term care bed projections are based on the town of Hay River, Acknowledgements First Nation, and Enterprise. What we know about the occupation of the beds right now is that at the extended care facility in Hay River, there are 23 people in there. 17 of them are over 70. There are 2 who are under 60. There are a number who have a diagnosis of dementia. We've got a number of people on the waiting list. There is a respite bed available, and that the work provided at Woodland Manor is equivalent to 35 full-time positions. So we have a lot of information about what's going on now, and we have a rationale for what we're projecting to happen in the future. And the task the department has, and I have as the minister, is to verify these numbers and persuade the member and residents of his community that these numbers are factual and verifiable and reliable, and these are the numbers we're going to go forward with. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Mumfui.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Ray Access Road upgrade is now underway this last summer and this summer. The people of Bishopcombe are grateful for this long-awaited improvement on highway safety, but they are not happy with the token number of jobs and business opportunities that the project has created for the community. Speaker, this is on Bishopcombe. The project is on Bishopcombe land and also public money. So I have questions for Minister of Infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, could the Minister tell this House what the general policy is respecting local economic spin-offs from highway projects such as Bishopcombe Access Road contract? Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Mumfui. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we don't have a policy per se on some of these tendered contracts. However, specifically for the Ray Access Road, RTL Construction started the work and we're expected to finish this fall of 2021. So about 60% of that work is completed. The peak season, we had about 28 people that were employed. Of that, 16 were Clecho citizens, which again is 57% of local involvement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Mumfui.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm more focused on the targeted agreement between the RTL and also Clinton government. So can the Minister of Infrastructure tell this House what the actual local employment and business targets are for the Bishopcombe Access Road project? Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Mumfui. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, further to the infrastructure cooperation agreement between the N.W.T and the Clecho government, an agreement has been reached where the Clecho businesses will supply 25% of labor to complete the Ray Access Road construction project. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Mumfui.
Mr. Speaker, since we still have at least 2 summers, actually 21, 22, 23, 3 summers, I'm more interested in what the targets the Minister has alluded to, and also the training apprentices components of local benefits agreement. So where is the training and apprenticeship component of the local benefits agreement within the contract itself, Mr. Speaker?
Thank you, Member for Mumfui. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't have that level of detail with me in terms of pulling the actual agreement here as quick as I can find it. So I may have to get back to I will get back to the member in terms of more specifics on the contract. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, final supplementary. Member for Mumfui.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, obviously the 25% target, that would have to be closely monitored. We've experienced in the past, whether it be with Stanton or other mega projects in the past, where it hasn't been really fulfilled. So I will be keeping an eye on that. So, Mr. Speaker, my last question is, what I'd like to know is if the Minister's Department has done enough to verify compliance with the local hiring targets and what enforcement measures that has taken when the targets are not met. Mr. Speaker, we still have 3-year summer projects, so this is very important. I'd like to know, get some answers on that, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Mumfui, Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to start off by saying it was a struggle to find some of the workers, as the diamond mines may attract many of the available workforce, and also some other projects like the Clecho construction. But I do want to say that RTL, the construction company, was able to maintain over 25% of the local labor requirement as per the ICA. How construction will resume in May 2021 and is expected to be completed, the full project, this fall 2021. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's not a 3-year project. It'll be done this fall. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Framley.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. My questions are for the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment, who administers income assistance. First, I'd like the Minister to confirm that it is this government's position that a garnishee of a tax refund is counted as unearned income and is deducted from income assistance payments to that client. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Framlake. Minister responsible for Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The income assistance regulations, Section 24JN0.2 state that the following shall be considered unearned income. That includes the goods and GST, tax credit, income tax, refunds, and including payments of tax credits. So yes, that is the correct interpretation of the legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Framlake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for confirming that. The Minister said that income assistance clients can use their annual, quote, unearned income exemption of up to $1,200 to offset the penalty for the garnishee. While this may be true, most people are required to pay back CERB through tax refund garnishees, and they probably owe a lot more than $1,200. This exemption was meant to offset the occasional gift from family or friends. Will the Minister be lenient in his interpretation of the words tax refund in the income assistance regulations and not claw back garnishees from tax refunds for CERB recipients for money that was never supposed to reduce income assistance in the first place? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Framlake. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And CERB never did reduce income assistance. Right now, if someone receives a tax refund, it is counted as income. If the Government of Canada takes that back, it's still counted as tax income. The income assistance program doesn't pay debts. However, the Government of Canada has stated that they're not going to be clawing back any of the monthly or quarterly tax credits that people receive, such as GST or child tax benefits. So it would likely only be the income tax refund, and for the majority of clients, that's about $350. And so that would be $350 out of the $1,200. But the Government of Canada is taking a compassionate approach to the collection of these debts, and I encourage any residents who have to pay CERB back to contact the Government of Canada and create a payment plan so that they can avoid hits like that. Right now, they're not strong-arming, they're not taking a very aggressive approach, and they understand that not everyone is in a situation to repay this money. And they also have a policy that ensures that there are financial hardship provisions to ensure that a person is not put into undue financial hardship because of recovery of government debt. However, in order to get that from the CRA, you have to reach out to them. So I encourage anyone who has to pay CERB back to reach out and make payment arrangements. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Framley.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that compassionate response. Great to point to the federal government and try to get compassion from them, but I'm talking to the Minister on the floor here. He needs to demonstrate and lead with some compassion from our government. So this perverse practice of deducting garnishees from tax refunds from income assistance is going to lead to excessive hardships for many N.W.T. residents who received CERB payments. Can the Minister tell us whether this situation is being tracked and what percentage of total income assistance recipients are suffering from this deduction of garnishees from their monthly payments? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Framlake. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'll also point out that a number of people have voluntarily paid back CERB once they realized that they weren't eligible for it. They made repayment arrangements. There's a number of people who are working who aren't on income assistance who may have to pay CERB back. So the income assistance program has continued throughout CERB, and it continues. no changes have been made except for the exemption of CERB. So there has been a very compassionate response. And to the member's exact question, which I should have answered first because it's eluding me somewhat. Yes, tracking the results. So generally there is reporting done on a monthly basis with income assistance. However, during the pandemic that was put on hold, and we've asked people to report their income starting in November. We've taken a lenient approach with that, and those numbers are still trickling in, so we don't have a total of how many people received CERB and do not know how many people need to pay it back, but it's a small percentage of the total number of income assistance recipients. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that, and of course, I'm going to be asking him the same question in May, June, so that's a quick heads up. But look, I'm convinced that we will be punishing income assistance recipients who were supposed to have no deductions as a result of CERB payments, who now have to pay it back through garnishes to tax refunds. And I think that's just a result of a harsh interpretation of the regulations. So will the Minister exercise some discretion and stop a garnishee on tax refunds as being considered unearned income, or change the regulations now to stop this punitive and perverse practice in these extraordinary times? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, we won't be changing the regulations. We won't be stopping this practice there. The CRA, whose program this is, has policies to prevent undue hardship. The Income Assistance Program has policies to exempt these types of funds. There's people who have made payment arrangements with CRA. There's people who've already paid this back we'd be punishing them for paying the money back when they could have just not paid it back and had it forgiven by income assistance. Essentially, what the member's asking is that the government of the N.W.T take over the CERB program and pay CERB. That's what we would be doing by basically writing off these amounts. And the CERB is what was a federal program, and the feds are handling it. And we are in contact with the federal government. I've had calls with the relevant ministers, and I told them about our situation here in the territory and that they need to take a compassionate approach. And from everything I can see, they have been doing that, and we will continue that advocacy. And I'm happy to keep the member and the Assembly updated with any progress and let everyone know what we hear. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today my questions are for the Minister of Health and Social Services. And my first question for the Minister is, can she confirm the vaccination rates in the Northwest Territories by small community, regional centre, and also Yellowknife? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't have the full detail that the member is looking for because the Chief Public Health Officer is still refining the numbers. But what I can say is that we've achieved approximately 58% uptake on vaccine dose 1 and 36% uptake on dose 2. The range of community level uptake is between 40% and the high 70s, depending on the particular community. We know from trending information that the highest uptake is in the oldest population and the lowest is in the youngest population. So the residents of the N.W.T who are between 18 and 34 are well below the 50% uptake in most communities. So at this point, it's fair to say that there is no region or community in the N.W.T that's met our target of vaccinating 75% of the population. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. No, I think that's very valuable information. I think it's also important that we know where work still needs to be done, especially when it comes to public education, and where we can kind of help make sure that our younger brothers and sisters and maybe our children or family members could stand to help us reach that herd immunity. What I'm wondering, Mr. Speaker, is since we know that we're working towards 75% vaccination rate and we're hoping to reach it before the summer, and hopefully I am very hopeful that the Department of Health is able to get there. in order to achieve herd immunity. But given that vaccination update has lagged in some communities, will changes to community public health restrictions happen on a community-by-community basis, depending on vaccination rates? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that question. It's not clear at this time whether the CPHO would make changes on a community-by-community basis. We do know that in the month of April, she's going to review the whole of the Emerging Wisely plan to look at ways in which to ease restrictions. Certainly, the vaccine rate will figure into that. The rate that we've all been discussing is 75%, and I think that rate is now in question to some extent, given changing situations such as the variants and how transmissible they are, vaccine uptake, a number of other things that may change the immunity level that we require in communities to say that we are fully vaccinated. So, and of course, as the member knows, children are not in this group, and there are a few others who haven't been vaccinated for various reasons. So the whole business of how much is enough is really up for debate at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think it's valuable to have the conversation about community by community lifting and easing of restrictions. You know, for example, if you end up with YELLOWKNIFE, who ends up with 75% vaccination rates, and they've had great success, say, in their community, and they want to get back to doing social activities, they want to ease up on restrictions as far as capacity and gatherings, and if we here in Yellowknife have not reached that level, it would be really unfortunate to have surrounding communities really held back by their opportunity. And likewise, it would also not benefit Yellowknife to be held to a standard of a community up in the Beaufort Delta or in N.W.T. And so not to put people against one another, but we will have different success at different points in time. And so I think it's valuable to be able to look at this from a community by community basis and not strictly an N.W.T. wide basis as well. But what I'm wondering is, based on where we're going, does the minister have any idea, given that we are in the last 3 days of session and people are looking for more information, does the minister have any idea of what types of easing of restrictions or potential changes within our borders that we might be able to see within summer months? Because I know that we are waiting on the Chief Public Health Officer, but there's a lot of planning that goes into summer months for businesses, especially when we have seasonal type work that occurs in the summer and people need to rehire, they need to retrain, and they need to be able to get their business going. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me state, first of all, that my hope is for a very high vaccine uptake so that the whole territory is able to come out of restrictions and resume life as we knew it a year ago. We do not want to pit communities against one another, and that's definitely one of the risks the CPHO will be assessing in deciding what detail to release to the public in terms of vaccination levels, whether it's feasible to release by community or by region. So some of the variables that the Office of the Chief Public Health Officer will be looking at, as I mentioned before, is whether the vaccine will prevent the transmission of the virus. We know that it will prevent people from getting sicker, but can you still carry the virus even when you're vaccinated and pass it on to someone else? It also, of course, depends on the vaccination rate, and it depends on how well the vaccine protects against the variants, which I feel are now on the doorstep, now that we know there are variants in Yukon and in Fort Chipewyan. It feels closer to home than ever before. So what the CPHO has said historically is that a high vaccination rate will enable us to to remove restrictions internally first. And so that will be things such as business capacity, summer music festivals, family gatherings, weddings, and so on and so forth, that those will be the activities that are at first going to be relaxed. And then the whole situation around the border and self-isolation will be addressed next, depending on what's happening in southern Canada. So we want to give businesses as much notice as possible to be prepared to open. And I hope that we'll be able to do this by the end of April when the CPHO issues her revised Emerging Wisely. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, some of the northern businesses that we rely on a regular basis continue to struggle under the existing public health restrictions. If the N.W.T cannot commit to changes in public health restrictions once herd immunity is reached, or if we still don't reach herd immunity this summer, how does the Department of Health and Social Services intend to support and advocate for the mental health and economic needs of Northerners under continued restrictions in the Northwest Territories? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you. I find it hard to answer a huge hypothetical there that crosses many different departments. What I want to say is that I appreciate that that residents in the N.W.T, the members of this House, want to return to normal gatherings, normal ways of doing business, normal ways of visiting family that they knew a year ago, and I'm keen on that as well. So my hope is that the rationale for easing the restrictions internally and externally will be made known to the public by the end of April. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the issues with consensus government is that I don't always collaborate with my colleagues, so therefore my colleague from Kamloops has asked a lot of the same questions, and in her lengthy answers, the minister has answered them. So I'm just going to ask to repeat sort of the same concerns that I have with my colleagues. When can businesses expect to receive easy-to-understand information, such as flowcharts or if-and-then scenarios, to allow them to plan for the remainder of 2021, information that contains dates and timelines and key milestones? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to repeat these answers for the member from Great Slave. What I want to say is I don't expect the kind of information that she is asking for, because the situation with COVID-19, with the vaccine rate, with the rate of variants and so on, it is so quickly changing that it would soon be obsolete to do the flowchart that she is asking for, and then to be able to make sure that it was implemented in exactly that way. It's just too fluid a situation. We do, however, appreciate the need for that kind of information, and we are more than happy to work with partners in business, the Chamber of Commerce, the mines, and other business entities to ensure that they have all the information that we have, and that they, with that information, can make decisions about what it is they're going to do next to get their businesses ready for reopening. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm really glad to hear the minister say she's going to work with business, because in business what we do is we call wargaming, and we actually come up with all the different scenarios in which things that might happen, and then we come up with responses to those. It's called a living document, so I would suggest that the minister go and look at that so that we could do some planning with actual times and dates. Moving on, over the last year since the onset of COVID-19, how much has the N.W.T increased our healthcare capacity, such as the purchase of new ventilators or increased staff, other than the COVID Secretariat, in order to work towards lessening the internal restrictions and decreasing mental health impacts? It's one thing to lock us all down, but if you've done nothing to address the situation, we're going to be in this situation for perpetuity. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think it's really important to note, first of all, we are not locked down. The borders are open. Hundreds of people cross the borders every single day. We have approved something like 35,000 self-isolation plans. People are not locked in or out of the N.W.T, but there are some guidelines in place for them coming and going. Since last year, of course, we have made significant increases in the capacity and resourcing of our health care system to be in a position to respond to COVID. Although we didn't have a lot of hospital cases, we wanted to be ready for that. We've allocated over $30 million in the health system, and many of these investments will continue to be in place, COVID or not. We've improved our capacity to acquire PPE into a stockpile, to train staff. We have been able to improve our own testing capacity. Now, rather than sending specimens to the lab in Winnipeg, we are doing those lab tests here in the N.W.T. We've set up the wastewater surveillance system in quite a number of communities to give us an early warning of a COVID signal. We've trained staff to do contact tracing, and we've looked at the unintended social consequences of COVID, such as the closure of libraries, which has resulted in the need for greater day shelter supports. We have increased access to mental health supports. We have a managed alcohol program in Yellowknife, and we have additional supports within Child and Family Services that mostly have to do with respite. So we have, in fact, produced a lot of extra capacity, and it's certainly our intention to continue to offer that to the residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Great Slave.
Mr. Speaker, that's great. I'm glad to hear that we've increased capacity. I would argue, though, that around the definition of the term lockdown, only those that actually can afford to go out, come back, pay isolation costs, etc. So really being able to leave the territory and come back really does come from a place of privilege. Moving on, when can residents expect a reduction to the isolation time requirements as a result of the vaccination program and utilizing rapid testing? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to repeat this point that the first restrictions that will be loosened will be those within our border, and those will concern greater capacity within your home, within your community gatherings, and at business locations. And once that happens, and the other data is in place about vaccine uptake, transmissibility, children being vaccinated, and so on, then the Chief Public Health Officer will look at how to modify and when to modify self-isolation requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just going to come back to my earlier question. How have we increased healthcare capacity? Have we purchased any new ventilators and such so that we could actually take on more COVID cases if need be? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's important for the member to understand that machines don't work without the people to operate them. In this case, you need respiratory technicians to operate ventilators. We have enough supply for the number of emergency beds that we have. We're very fortunate not to have needed that more than a couple of times during this whole outbreak. But we are confident that we are securely placed to deal with a COVID outbreak in the event there is one. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Tunde-Welde.
Mr. Speaker, I'll try to tease out the right information after listening from my colleagues from Kamloops and Great Slave. And I'm happy to hear that the Department of Health and Social Services, they're going to review, the CPHO is going to review how we are guiding our restrictions. So I guess my first question to the Minister is the Department of Health and Social Services still using the Emergency Wisely Plan to guide decisions around restrictions? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Tunde-Welde. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for that question. Yes, Emerging Wisely is still the guiding document produced in May of last year. We know that there were a number of exemptions requested where items that were supposed to be loosened in Phase 3 were loosened in Phase 2, the phase that we're in now, and that what we're talking about is when we get into Phase 3, and that's the work that will go on in April. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Tunde-Welde.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, and I'm just trying to go in the right direction here. Again, listening to my colleagues here. So, given everything that we've seen over the last year, does that mean we will have a new updated Emerging Wisely document with a clear timeline to easing restrictions? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Tunde-Welde. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my expectation is that the Emerging Wisely plan will be revised, and as the member for Great Slave suggested, it will be a living document. There are so many variables that go into the CPHO's decision about risk assessment that it needs to be a living document, and it will be a living document. And so putting a firm timeline on when we're going into Phase 3 is very difficult to do, especially as the country now looks at locking down in other places because of the emergence of variants. But certainly the idea of looking at Phase 3 is to get ourselves ready for fewer restrictions. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Minister stated, new hospitals and machines only work if we have the people, and the people are healthcare workers that we rely on. I know we've faced a number of retention issues. They're nothing new to the North, but my question for the Minister of Health and Social Services is, what is the number one reason that nurses are leaving the Northwest Territories? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, exit surveys are not consistently used, so I am unable to answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I guess that gets to my next question is, if we're not tracking why our nurses are leaving, whether that be due to burnout, not getting paid enough, workplace culture, lack of housing, there can be a long list of reasons why a nurse does not leave. And I note that the N.W.T for teachers tracks this information diligently and responds to each of those concerns when a teacher decides to go down south. So is this part of the work the Department of Health and Social Services is doing in this area, is to track with exit interviews the reasons nurses leave the Northwest Territories? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Northwest Territories Health and Social Services system has created a human resource development plan, and they've done that with the Department of Finance, and it's my understanding that exit surveys will be reviewed as a potential action item in this area so that we can provide the kind of information that the member is talking about and gain a greater understanding of why nurses do choose to leave. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, and I recognize that there's probably a suite of these questions I can also ask to the corresponding minister for the Department of Finance. In the Department of Health and Social Services business plan, there is, this year we were supposed to have completed new recruitment and retention strategies to guide that work. Has that work been completed? And I heard the minister say that, the potential of exit surveys. What I'm really looking for is a comprehensive strategy I can sit down and nurses can review to see where we're going. So has that work for new recruitment and retention strategies been completed yet? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to report that this work is on track. We've had a total of 14 marketing and advertising campaigns for the hard-to-fill health and social services positions in the last 3 months, including 9 of these campaigns that are specific to nurses. We've expanded the Health and Social Services Professions Career Guide, which provides information for potential candidates about careers in health and social services in the Northwest Territories. We have continuing education initiatives for licensed practical nurses and RNs through the Targeted Academic Support Program. We also support continuing education initiatives for specialty nursing positions through an extended mentorship program. And then finally, we have an activity and programming initiative called REACH that involves students and youth in the health and social services area to consider careers serving the public in this way. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to hear that work, and I know that some of the specialization work and the training to get people into nursing is some of the best work we're doing in this area. My concern is also specifically on the retention. I know there's a new recruitment unit going out, and I know we're offering signing bonuses, and we're attracting locums, and we're getting more people to come here. But previously, in a number of different formats, the department has offered retention benefits. These were service agreements. If you work 1 year, you get a bonus at the conclusion of that year, or some sort of benefit to stay longer in the position. The collective agreement allows us to do this. Are service agreements something the department is willing to return to using? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just to provide some numbers for turnover, this is for March 31st, 2020. The turnover rate at the N.W.T. Health and Social Services Authority was 15%. For the GNWT as a whole, it was 13.2%. So our turnover rate at the Health Authority is on par with the government as a whole. The NTHSSA does not offer retention bonuses at this point. All the compensation and benefits that nurses and health professionals earn are part of the current collective agreement with the UNW. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Hay River North. Sorry. Oh, Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess just sitting here thinking about the previous answers from the Minister of Health on the 48 beds in Hay River. I have a problem that the projections were done, the decision was made with no consultation with the community. Because in Hay River and in other small communities, it's very important to engage the people that are there if we're going to make decisions. So I guess I would ask the minister if she's willing to, if she and her department are willing to keep an open mind when she hears from Hay River residents and concerned organizations as well with respect to the need for 48 beds in Hay River, or is the consultation process just a moot point? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Hay River South. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my understanding that this is a genuine engagement. We do want to verify the numbers with residents of Hay River. We plan to meet with the Town Council, the Senior Society, and with the Indigenous organizations. And we want to make sure that we haven't overlooked or missed anything that is important to the calculation of these numbers. So I'm going to say this is a genuine way of getting community input into this. I don't know what the end result is, but I also ask the member to keep an open mind that in fact 48 institutional beds may not be the best outcome for the residents of Hay River. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank Minister for that answer, and I will keep an open mind on that, and as I go around with her and listen to the comments and concerns from people in Hay River. I guess the one thing that she had mentioned previously as well is the catchment area. I realize Fort Providence, Kikiza, Fort Res are in different regions. But the reality is that Hay River is a regional center. It's a regional center to Fort Providence. It's a regional center to Kikiza and to Fort Res. And people come in from those communities for a number of reasons. Right now I think we have in our extended care 4 people from Fort Providence, somebody from Smith, N.W.T, Fort Simpson as well. So we do get people from those areas. So I think that the department has to look at the reality of beyond the Detchell region or the South Slave or whatever, and see what's real. And the real thing out there is that Hay River is a regional center for the outlying communities. So I guess I would ask the minister, will the minister look at the reality of Hay River catchment area, and will they consider that Fort Providence, Kikiza, and Fort Resolution are actually in that area? Because Hay River has doctors. I suspect that if you have an extended care facility, it's important to have doctors there. So that's the question I have for the minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Hay River South. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, of those people who currently live at Woodland Manor, none are from Fort Resolution and none are from Kikiza, but 4 are from Fort Providence. It turns out that you can be in long-term care in the N.W.T. wherever you want to be in long-term care. So while there are people in Woodland Manor who are not from Hay River, such as the person from N.W.T, and from Fort Smith and from Fort Simpson. Likewise, there are people from Hay River who are in long-term care facilities in other parts of the N.W.T. This is a personal choice that they can make based on where their supports and their families are. So just because you live in Hay River doesn't mean you have to go into long-term care in Hay River. And as I say, with respect to the catchment area, the only community that seems to have any residents within the Woodland Manor is Fort Providence. And there are four of the 23 are from Fort Providence. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the minister confirm, if timely access to a doctor is a consideration when assessing where long-term beds will be located? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Hay River South. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the long-term care facilities are located or will be located in hubs where there is a greater medical staff presence and also a greater opportunity to recruit and retain nurses. But a physician is not essential. I think about the long-term care center in Norman Wells, and I don't believe Norman Wells has a doctor, but there is long-term care there. So I think it's a nice to have rather than a must have. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess since I'm willing to keep an open mind, I would ask the minister what additional resources would be provided to the Hay River Health Authority to make sure that we're providing the home care services that are required. Like, are we looking at additional dollars? Are we looking at additional infrastructure? Are we looking at additional funds to help support people who do want to stay in homes? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Hay River South. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my vision is that more people will live in long-term care, will live in their own homes with home care support than live in long-term care. And in order to achieve that, we need to invest in nurses, personal support workers. We have to evaluate the outcome of the paid community caregiver program and see which resources best fit the needs for people who are trying to age in place. So the home and community care study that was tabled about 18 months ago has specific numbers of nurses and personal support workers required to make aging in place work. And there is no budget item for them at this point, but it certainly is my expectation that there will be a budget item and there will be a specific number of staff hired to take care of the people who want to age in place. And I would refer the member to the Home and Community Care Study to find the detail. And if he finds that that's lacking, by all means, ask again. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The questions again are for the Minister of Health. I want to talk about, when we talk about extended care, we have a couple of people in there that are, I don't know, in the probably younger than 50 or younger than 60, and I'd just like to, like in Haver, we do have a assisted or a independent or assisted living facility there, but the problem is that it's, to get in there, you got to wait 2 or 3 or 4 years. So what, has the department in looking at, the needs on the extended care side considered the shortcomings on the assisted living side? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Haver South. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are, according to my notes, 2 people under 60 who live at Woodland Manor. So it's two out of 23. I don't believe that the people who live in the assisted living facilities needs have specifically been taken into account in the long-term care. The long-term care is really about institutional care for elders who require high levels of nursing care on a day-to-day 24/7 basis. But having said that, there is now a supported living review going on by the department has an RFP out to choose a contractor to do that, so that we can look at how we can, first of all, repatriate people who are in out-of-territory placements, and secondly, how we can increase capacity in the N.W.T. For people who need assisted living who are not also elderly. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess I want to, I look at the, like in Hay River, we've got the 10 new beds that they built a few years ago, and we have 15 existing that was in Woodland Manor. So what my concern is that, by putting in 24 versus 48, I'm not sure what's going to happen to Woodland Manor. And my concern is that, they may do what they're doing with the old hospital and knock it down. I haven't really heard of any plans to turn it into anything else at this point. One area that we're really deficient on in our extended care in Woodland Manor is a place for dementia patients, and we probably have several there right now, and without that, I don't think they have the support they require. So I would ask the Minister, has that been taken into consideration when you looked at the extended care facility? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Haver South. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, according to my information, 9 of 23 clients at Woodland Manor have dementia, and I certainly do recognize that residents with dementia need additional care. We don't want them to roam or leave or hurt themselves or be lost. So it's my understanding that all of the new builds for long-term care centers take into account dementia as a diagnosis, and they are constructed to keep dementia patients safe. So that is a consideration in all of the long-term care builds. As things stand now, we only have a long-term care facility here in Yellowknife, and we recognize that going forward that people want their family members to be at home. So it makes more sense to do it the other way, where all centres are for dementia patients rather than having only a specialized centre in Yellowknife. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the issues that come up as well is that when you get an elderly couple and one has to go into extended care, the spouse may be required to, live elsewhere, and we separate them. Has there been any consideration by the department at looking at putting smaller independent living units on the site where extended care in Woodland Manor and Hay River currently is, to allow for couples to be together and grow old together? Because recently we had a couple that had to move out of territory, somebody that born and raised here, and even though they want to stay here, it's sad to see that. So I'm just wondering if the department has used that as a consideration as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Haver South. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure if the department has specifically considered that scenario. If it's independent living, it sounds like this would be part of the Housing Corporation's offerings for seniors housing. Obviously, it would be our intention to keep couples together. That they should be together at the end of their lives as they have been through their lives. And so we would want that to happen. But how that is going to look in long-term care, I'm not really sure how that's going to look, whether there will be suites available to accommodate couples rather than rooms for single people. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the Minister if there has been any preliminary designs for either the 48 or 24 bed for Hay River, because I look at the cost of a 48 bed, which would probably be less than doing two 24s. So this whole exercise is going to end up costing more money to this government if we split that building. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Haver South. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the issues we're talking about here go beyond budgets and money. Aging in place is what most seniors want for themselves. They want to stay in their home. They want to have services that come to them from the community, whether it's a nurse or a personal support worker or a family member. And they want these people to assist them to remain independent for as long as possible. And that's really the future for elders in the Northwest Territories and in the country as a whole. Long-term care has turned out to be a disaster in Southern Canada. It has turned out to be a place where way too many people have died because of poor or no standards, poor regulation, issues around having people work in multiple places for very low wages. And so we are fortunate here in the sense that the government offers long-term care, and so there is accountability. There isn't a need to make a profit. We can accommodate people where they are. And so what I want to say to the member is that if there are sketches and cost estimates, I'm not aware of them, and if there are those, they would be out of date. The cost estimates would be out of date. I'm not aware of anything new going on here, but I would really like the member to turn his mind to the benefits of aging in place, which we recognize by putting into our mandate, and which most people prefer to being in an institutional setting. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Colleagues, our time for oral questions has expired. Written questions, member for Frame Lake.
Monsieur le Président. My questions are for the Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs. Responsibilities established in the mandate letter of the Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs include, quote, the development and maintenance of community governments with sufficient legal authority and resources to carry out community responsibilities, end of quote. Can the Minister state which N.W.T communities have been placed under supervision during the past 5 years, and 1, when and where MACA or other N.W.T staff have been seconded or assigned to community governments to provide support during a vacancy of senior administrative officer or finance officer positions over the last 5 years, and 2, what activities MACA has undertaken to facilitate the staffing of vacant community government senior administrative staff positions, and 3, the type, number, and uptake of training opportunities through the School of Community Government or other special training opportunities to build senior administrative positions capacity at the community level, and 4, the type and level of support to the local government administrators of the N.W.T. LGANT to expand that organization's activities for senior administrative position recruitment, training, and retention. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Minister responsible for Public Utilities Board.
Mr. Speaker, I have a provision return to written questions asked by member for N.W.T regarding practices of using power limiters in the Northwest Territories. I have received the information late and will provide a formal return tomorrow, March 30th, 2021. Merci.
Thank you, Minister. Returns to written questions. Replies to the Commissioner's address. Petitions. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of standing and special committees. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document, follow-up letter for oral question 597-19(2), a New Day program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document, follow-up letter for oral question 641-19(2), Hunters and Trappers Disaster Compensation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, tabling of documents. Member for Framley.
See, Monsieur le Président, I wish to table the following 2 documents. A letter dated February 9th, 2021 from the YWCA to the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment regarding requests for change in Garnachie interpretation, and a letter dated March 8th, 2021 from the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment to the YWCA on the same topic. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Tabling of documents. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table a letter from the Yellowknife Chamber of Commerce, transparent process for easing restrictions within the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Cam Lake. Tabling of documents. Members, I hereby table the 2018 to 2020 annual report of the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories. Members, I am pleased to note that the report's message from the Speaker is included in English, French, and Gwich'in. Merci. Tabling of documents. Notices of motion. Member for Yellowknife North.
Mr. Speaker, I give notice that on Wednesday, March 31st, 2021, I will move the following motion. I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Hay River North, that notwithstanding Rule 4, when this House adjourns on Wednesday, March 31st, 2021, it shall be adjourned until Thursday, May 27th, 2021. And further, that any time prior to May 27th, 2021, if the Speaker is satisfied, after consultation with the Executive Council and members of the Legislative Assembly, that the public interest requires that the House should meet at an earlier time during the adjournment or at a time later than the scheduled resumption of the House, the Speaker may give notice, and thereupon the House shall meet at the time stated in such notice and shall transact its business as if it had been duly adjourned to that time. And Mr. Speaker, at the appropriate time, I will be seeking unanimous consent to deal with this motion. Mr. Speaker, I will not be seeking unanimous consent, and I will give this motion on Wednesday, March 31st. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Yellowknife North. Notice is a motion. Notice is a motion. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I give notice that on Wednesday, March 31st, 2021, I will move the following motion. Now, therefore, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Sawtooth, that Mr. Sheldon Toner of Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, be recommended to the Commissioner of the Northwest Territories for appointment as a member of the Human Rights Adjudication Panel, effective immediately for a term of 4 years. And further, that Lou Siebert of Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, and Jay Sengupta of Hamilton, Ontario, be recommended to the Commissioner of the Northwest Territories for appointment as members of the Human Rights Adjudication Panel, effective immediately for a term of 4 years. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Kamloops. Notice is a motion. Notice is a motion. Motions. Notice is a motion for the first reading of bills. Notice is a motion for the first reading of bills. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, I move, second by the Honourable Member for Nahende, that Bill 24, an Act to amend the Revolving Fund Act, be read for the first time. Must see, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The motion is in order. The motion is not debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Thank you, Minister of Infrastructure. Bill 24 has had first reading. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Minister responsible for education, culture, and employment.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Range Lake, that Bill 25, an Act to amend the Education Act, be read for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The motion is in order. The motion is not debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Thank you, Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment. Bill 25 has had first reading. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Yellowknife Centre, that Bill 26, Supplementary Appropriation Act, Operations Expenditures Number 3, 2020-2021, be read for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The motion is in order. The motion is not debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Thank you, Minister of Finance. Bill 26 has had first reading. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Minister responsible for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Inuvik-Boot Lake, that Bill 27, Supplementary Appropriation Act, Infrastructure Expenditures Number 3, 2020-2021, be read for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The motion is in order. The motion is not debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Thank you, Minister of Finance. Bill 26 has had first reading. Oh, Bill 27, sorry. Bill 27 has had first reading. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Yellowknife Centre, that Bill 26, Supplementary Appropriation Act, Operations Expenditures Number 3, 2020-2021, be read for the second time. This bill makes supplementary appropriations for operation expenditures of the Government of the Northwest Territories for the 2020-2021 fiscal year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Motion is in order to the principle of the bill. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is carried. Bill 26 has had second reading. Second reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Inuvik-Boot Lake, that Bill 27, Supplementary Appropriation Act, Infrastructure Expenditures, Number 3, 2020-2021, be read for the second time. This bill makes supplementary appropriations for the infrastructure expenditures of the Government of the Northwest Territories for the 2020-2021 fiscal year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The motion is in order to the principle of the bill. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Bill 27 has had second reading. Second reading of bills. Excuse me. Consideration in Committee of the Whole of Bills and Other Matters. Committee Report 8 and 9-19 brackets 2, table document 286-19 brackets 2. By the authority given to me as Speaker by motion 1-19 brackets 2, I hereby authorize the House to sit beyond the daily hours of adjournment to consider the business before the House as member for Haver South and the Chair. Thank you.
I now call Committee of the Whole to order. What is the wish of committee, Mr. Norn?
Mr. Chair, committee wishes to consider the following documents. Table document 286-19 bracket 2, main estimates 2021-2022, and committee report 8-19 bracket 2, report of motion 5-19 bracket 2, referral of point of privilege raised by member from Montfouet on March 10th, 2020. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, committee. We will take a short recess and resume with the first item. Thank you. Okay, I'll call the Committee of the Whole back to order. Committee, we have agreed to consider table document 286-19, bracket 2, main estimates 2021-2022. Does the Minister of Finance have any opening remarks?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I believe I do have some opening remarks. Mr. Chair, over the past few weeks, the Legislative Assembly has been considering the 2021-22 main estimates. And in our system of consensus government, Cabinet does not pass the main estimates without at least 3 supporting votes from regular members of the Legislative Assembly. I know there is at times a perception that getting these votes would involve deals made one by one with individual MLAs, rather than through a process that considers the collective priorities of the Northwest Territories. Mr. Speaker, it is to the credit of every member of this Assembly, this was not how we have arrived at a point in the consideration of the 2021-22 main estimates, where I now offer several commitments in response to negotiations. The last few weeks has involved several conversations between myself and the Chair and the Deputy Chair of the Committee of Accountability and Oversight, to which all the non-cabinet MLAs belong. Several areas were identified where more work needed to be done for the good of the people of the Northwest Territories. In some cases, that work is policy-based, such as seeing the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation go through the government renewal process as soon as possible, and confirming that targets will be part of the Department of Finance's Indigenous Recruitment and Retention Framework. Discussions of policy do not necessarily require financial additions to the main estimates, but they are key to the work of government and were a very positive addition to these discussions. In other cases, issues or challenges were identified on behalf of committee, but it was helpful that committee members allowed departments to explain what tools are in fact available, rather than insist on solutions that might not be a best fit. And as a result, the investments I am committing to can be more strategic. Finally, this process was aimed at remaining fiscally responsible, so that with these increases, we are also looking for decreases rather than simply continuing to grow expenses without significant new revenues. Mr. Chair, I want to thank every member of the 19th Legislative Assembly for making this a consensus process that was not only possible, but indeed productive. And with that, Mr. Chair, I have several commitments I'd like to go through. We've arrived at the following. With respect to midwifery, there'll be a $600,000 addition for the Department of Health and Social Services to enable their commitment to move the Northwest Territories midwifery program into Phase 2 of its implementation, further to the 2017 Midwifery Stakeholders Report. With respect to aftercare facilities, there'll be $1.4 million for the Department of Health and Social Services to support aftercare and community-based addictions programs and services by first establishing a $750,000 community-based addictions and aftercare fund for external organizations to access funding to hire counselors, both traditional wellness and community counselors, in support of specific community needs. And second, $650,000 to fund community development resources as follows: $150,000 to fund the Senior Advisor for Indigenous Knowledge and Wellness Coordinator, and $500,000 to fund additional community development activities, including the development of standards and a toolkit to help communities work through policy decisions to determine what will work best in their communities, help adapt program parameters to reflect community needs, and help guide the selection of appropriate infrastructure or programming for each community. The Anti-Poverty Fund. There will be $935,000 for the Department of Health and Social Services to support efforts towards reducing poverty in the Northwest Territories. This funding includes $750,000 to the Anti-Poverty Fund, $110,000 to increase funding for the Roundtable Advisory Council, and $75,000 to increase core funding for the Hay River Shelter. Indigenous Patient Advocates. There will be $743,000 for the Department of Health and Social Services for 4 positions to pilot a new approach to assisting with improving cultural safety and patient experience, supporting Indigenous patients in having their concerns, complaints, and questions resolved, and bridging cultural and language barriers. The Indigenous Patient Advocates, located in the N.W.T's acute care facilities, would work to ensure patients receive culturally safe care and also help deal with the impact of illness and hospitalization, provide cultural, spiritual, and emotional support, and help make connections with family members, elders, and community organizations. The 4 Indigenous patient navigators will be staffed by the health authorities and located in Inuvik, Hay River, Fort Smith, and Yellowknife. Indigenous cultural awareness is an important criterion for these positions. Job descriptions will therefore include consideration of equivalencies so that the focus will be on navigation rather than counseling. Travel reductions. The Department of Finance will be working with departments to implement reductions to the travel budgets totaling $4.03 million. We will ensure that non-discretionary travel that varies by department will not be adversely affected. Several other commitments, Mr. Chair. First, $500,000 for the Department of Education, Culture and Employment to increase the Child Care Infrastructure Fund. $100,000 for the Department of Health and Social Services to increase the Child and Family Services contribution. The Department of Justice agrees to maintain the court clerk position in Hay River. The Northwest Territories Housing Corporation has funding available in 21-22 to provide resources to the Hay River Homeless Shelter to support its operating costs. The Housing Corporation will bring forward a funding request during the 22-23 business planning process for ongoing funding for both the shelter in Hay River and in Fort Simpson. The Department of Environment and Natural Resources commits to completing the caribou survey work that was not completed in 2021 in 21-22. The department will commit to bringing forward a supplementary appropriation to reestablish the cash flow that would have been lapsed from 2021 and which will be required to complete this work in the fiscal year. The Department of Industry, Tourism and Investment will continue to support the town of Fort Smith with its tourism priorities to a total of $130,000 over 2 years. In addition, the department will commit to support 7 community tourism coordinator positions, each at a value of $50,000 annually in 21-22 and 22-23. This increases the number of funded community tourism coordinator positions up from 4. In addition, the Department of Industry, Tourism and Investment will reach out to the community of Fort Providence regarding their interest in and readiness for a community tourism coordinator position for the community for 21-22 and 22-23. If the community applies for this funding, the department will provide $50,000 from within existing resources for the 21-22 and 22-23 so that the CTC positions can include Fort Providence. The department does not have dedicated funding for visitor information centers, but the department further commits to consulting with all Northwest Territories visitor information centers on their future priorities and projects. The Department of Industry, Tourism and Investment will continue to fund the Hamlev Tuktoyaktuk with funding to retain the Economic Development Officer position in the community. The department will fund this support in 21-22 with existing funding and bring forward future requirements through the business planning process. The Department of Finance will commit to providing members of the Legislative Assembly Standing Committee an options paper that discusses the review process for the affirmative action policy by March of 2022 and the Indigenous recruitment and retention framework prior to the start of the 22-23 business plan review process. The Northwest Territories Housing Corporation's mandate review will examine the corporation's strategic objectives to ensure the organization is meeting the requirements of its establishment policy and the priorities of the Legislative Assembly. This work is planned in 21-22. In addition, I will commit that the Department of Finance's government renewal process on the corporation will examine and measure the effectiveness of specific program delivery in meeting the corporation's mandate objectives. I will commit to including the additional funding and the reduction to departmental travel budgets in the 21-22 Supplementary Appropriation Number 1 Operations Expenditure to be considered during the June 2022 sitting of the Legislative Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I will now open the floor for general comments. Do any members have any general comments before we begin the departmental summaries? Member for Tune-a-Day, Will-a-Day.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and you know, this was a lot of work that went into this, and you know, a lot of staff, a lot of time put into this, and I think, as the minister mentioned, you know, there was a collaborative effort, a lot of moving parts, but you know, like I said, it wasn't just any one member; it was all of us working together, and you know, I'm very, very proud that we moved forward with this, and again, you always hear those the media say things about background deals, and there was nothing like that done here. It was all very open. We were very I guess there's a certain amount of commitment we had, and of course, you know, there's always going to be compromise. Not everybody's going to get what they want. You know, this job is very difficult. You can't make everybody happy. You know, like we're not dry meat, but. It was, again, like going back to what I was saying, collaborative effort, and, you know, I'm very proud, and I don't have much else to say. I didn't have anything prepared. You know, speaking from the heart here, I'm really, really proud of the work we've done as a whole. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I too want to extend a lot of thanks to my colleagues on this side of the House for the work that we did together, you know, looking at the main estimates. You know, people often just don't know how much work goes on behind the scenes here. We don't really do a very good job explaining this, but you know, we met and reviewed the main estimates department by department with ministers and their staff over a period of a couple of weeks. You know, then we had to work together as regular MLAs to figure out what we thought was missing or could be improved in the budget. So there's an immense amount of work that goes on behind the scenes. And I want to compliment my colleagues for us working together on our side of the House, but as much as it takes this side of the House to get its act together, we also have to thank our colleagues on the Cabinet side, and particularly Minister of Finance for the leadership in the negotiations to achieve these gains for all of our residents. And, you know, I know often the Minister said that she was the messenger on behalf of her Cabinet colleagues, but there was a lot of effort behind the scenes to work with the Minister of Finance to try to get a better understanding of on some of these issues like midwifery or Indigenous patient advocates, what was going on already within the departments and whether we needed to push a little bit harder to perhaps get a resolution on some of these issues. So once again, my sincere thanks to the Minister of Finance and all our colleagues on the Cabinet side. Look, I sat through the last Assembly. This did not happen in the last Assembly. I want to give you every bit of assurance that this is a different way of doing business and a much improved way of doing business. And, you know, and this is really how consensus government can and should work. And so I really want to compliment my colleagues on the other side for their efforts in doing this collectively. You know, and I think we achieved a lot in terms of the capital budget as well and the previous main estimates. But this one I think was a really extraordinary effort on everybody's part to try to work together. And so I hope the media is listening and that they do pick up on this, that there have been some extraordinary gains for all of our residents with the additions that we've worked together on. And of course, we'll be back in May, June to formalize all of that. But once again, thanks to our side of the House, colleagues working together and with our Cabinet colleagues to get this important set of results for our citizens. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a bit of a hard act to follow when my colleague is getting thumps from the Cabinet side. So I do agree that, you know, being on this side of the House now, it's an interesting process to go through. I have to admit to not paying so much attention to it as a minister because the lovely Minister of Finance would take care of that generally. So I'm really happy to see that we have been able to, we've been listened to, we've been able to get some concessions around some things around social supports and such. And I believe the Cabinet really listened to us there. I guess my only comment that I want to make further is that it's great to say we're going to put money somewhere, but now it's the execution of getting that money out the door. So while it's great, yeah, that we can say we've got so much dollars here and there, if we don't spend it, it's just lip service. So I commit to working with my colleagues there on the other side to get that money spent, and I'm sure they know we'll hold them accountable if they don't. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too would like to thank the members from Cabinet and especially the Minister of Finance for listening to the colleagues on this side of the House. I appreciate the phase 2 of the midwifery program. I think that's a very important part of our traditional way of, because everybody was born at home in the early years, and now that hasn't been happening to a great extent, and I really appreciate that. And I too want to thank everybody for working together, because I think that's what consensus government is all about. And you know, the relationship that we have with Cabinet as ordinary members is also extremely important, and this shows that consensus government can work. And with that, I want to just say thank you to my colleagues and to all members of Cabinet and the Premier. Thank you.
Thank you, member. Any further comments? Not seeing any. Does the Minister of Finance wish to bring witnesses into the House?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Sergeant at Arms, please escort the witnesses into the chamber. Would the Minister please introduce the witness?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have Sandy Calgatar, Deputy Minister of Finance.
Thank you. Committee, we have previously deferred the matter of consideration of departmental summaries. Members, please turn to page 21 of the tabled document. Education, Culture and Employment. Operation Expenditures, Total Department, 2021-2022. Main estimates. $353,599,000. Does the committee agree? Agree. Thank you, committee. We will continue with the departmental summary for Environment and Natural Resources on page 69. Environment and Natural Resources, Operation Expenditures, Total Department, 2021-2022. Main estimates, $97,874,000. Does committee agree? Thank you. Committee, we will continue with the departmental summary for our Executive and Indigenous Affairs on page 109. Executive and Indigenous Affairs, Operation Expenditures, Total Department, 2021-2022. Main estimates, $22,428,000. Does the committee agree? Agree. Thank you. Committee, we will continue with the departmental summary for Finance on page 137. Finance Operation Expenditures, total, member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Now that I got all that nice stuff off my chest, I have a few tougher questions for the Minister of Finance. And I'm looking at page 135, it's the revenue summary. And when I look down at taxation, there's the listing for corporate income tax for 21-22 seems to be a negative $8.4 million. Does that mean we're shelling out $8.4 million? We're giving it back to corporations. What does this figure really mean? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, these numbers, all of the numbers that are with respect to taxes are generated by the Canada Revenue Agency. So this is a reflection of the fact that as corporate income tax payers would be paying incrementally over the course of a year based on estimates that are generated often from the year before and not necessarily on what their final actuals for the year might be. When the final numbers come in, the CRA then will perhaps after the fact determine that what they have been remitting to the N.W.T may be beyond or above what in fact will be paid in by the corporations. And so that's what this is a reflection of, is that it's money that we will now be owing back to the Department of Finance Canada for overpayment in light of the estimates that were given being above what the actuals in fact turned out to be. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Member?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So if I wasn't confused before, so are we getting any corporate taxes then in 21-22, or are we giving a whole bunch of money back to folks, to corporations? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, if I might turn this one over to the Deputy Minister, please.
Deputy Minister?
Mr. Chair, so we are in fact getting corporate income tax revenues, as we always do, from Finance Canada. The 2021 estimate, this happens to be less than the amount the Finance Canada is clawing back due to the overpayments from previous fiscal years. That's why it's showing up as negative. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Member?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm trying to reconcile this. Clearly, corporate income tax is not a great way to try to finance a government, especially when it's bouncing up and down. You know, look at what was predicted, main estimates in the current year, 25 million, and then we're only going to get 1.9 million in the current year. I know the pandemic and so on is going on, but this just doesn't seem to be a very reliable way to, or very completely unpredictable way to get revenues for the government. What is the department, what's the minister doing to try to stabilize the revenue side of the equation in some kind of predictable way? You know, we're pretty good at, and I want to give the minister credit for the government renewal initiative as a way to try to better manage our expenditures moving forward. But what are we doing to try to stabilize the revenues? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, certainly given that on the corporate side, there are really three large payers that make up a high proportion of the total corporate income taxes that are coming in to the N.W.T. So when that particular industry, when the diamond industry suffers a significant loss, that is going to have a significant impact on this line item. Even though it's only, as I say, handful of small business or handful of businesses, and all in one sector. So, you know, arguably one solution to that would be to have greater diversity in the economy so that we're not so reliant on one particular sector and even a sector within that sector. And secondarily would be to expand the number of those companies that are paying. So again, having growth not only in diversity, but simply a growth in the number of companies and corporations that are in fact paying the corporate income tax. Now, all that said, it's much more easily said than done. To actually expand an economy is not necessarily something that the government of the Northwest Territories or any government itself can do on its own. It depends very much on factors outside. But what we can try to do is create conditions and create an environment that supports and contributes and inspires diversification of the economy and supports the establishment of more small businesses and that can hopefully grow into medium-sized businesses and also encourage investments so that by doing those things, we then get that diversification that will help stabilize overall revenues. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Member?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for that. A few options there. I think I've got a few other options that the minister should consider as well, like a resource tax or a production-based royalty. You know, and if we turn over to ITI, of course, further into the budget, and I'm not going to ask questions on that one because I already exhausted those before, but, you know, we do know that this year we're going to get zero royalties from diamond mining. And next year, I think it's predicted at $1.5 million. Like, we got to find a way to stabilize these revenues and make them more based on production rather than when they decide to sell them, and so on. Because 2 of the 3 diamond mines remained open during the pandemic, and so on. So, in any event, I guess my suggestion to the minister is that we find ways to stabilize these revenues in ways that are based more on production than on profit and sales. So that's what I would do if I was the finance minister. But one last question for the minister, which is, are these sort of issues going to be part of the discussion for the next budget in the revenue options paper that the minister has committed to make public, and the kind of discussion she intends to have as part of the next, for the preparation of the next budget. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, just today started having conversations with communications around the setup for this summer, spring and summer's budget dialogues or budget engagements. So, and yes, there will be more, again, revenue options will form part of that. And, you know, the benefit, it was tremendous to me, the benefit that we had last summer of doing the revenue, or I'm sorry, of doing the budget dialogues and hearing directly from different industries and those who are experts in their own industries about what they were hoping to see and what would work or not work. So, I mean, the simple answer is to say, yes, we'll have a revenue options portion to that, to the dialogues, to the engagement, and we'll need to hear back from those that are, you know, both in the industry, but also, you know, in the non-for-profit sector, in the city, in municipal governments, you know, different spectrums across the Northwest Territories, and can hear more at that point where the people of the Northwest Territories would like to see themselves falling in terms of possibilities for revenue options and revenue generation. So, and certainly, Mr. Chair, committee will see that presentation before it becomes finalized. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Member?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the Minister for that. I appreciate it, and I look forward to hearing what the public has to say in terms of the revenue side of the equation, because I just don't think we paid enough attention to it. And I did neglect one other thing, to mention one other thing, that we need a new arrangement with the federal government where we get to keep more of our own source revenues. If, you know, we got to start to cut those apron strings from Ottawa and find ways to become more self-sufficient. And that, as I said, means a new fiscal arrangement with Ottawa where we get to keep all or a greater portion of our own source revenue. So I think that needs to be something that I want my cabinet colleagues to focus on as well moving forward. And I'll certainly be pushing them in that direction. That's all I've got. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I just I'll note a caution that, of course, 85% of our budget comes from the federal government. So while I'm certainly always going to look for ways to better streamline what money we get and how we can spend it so that we have the flexibility to do things according to our priorities, that at the same time, the deal that we have, you know, just to be cautious that we aren't looking for greener grass that might not actually be so green. So that said, we can't figure out these ideas without having the conversations, and so point taken that those conversations can continue to be had. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, Finance, Operation Expenditures, Total Department, 2021-2022, main estimates, $301,826,000. Does the committee agree? Thank you. Committee, we will continue with the departmental summary for Health and Social Services on page 169. Health and Social Services, Operation Expenditures, Total Department, 2021-2022, main estimates, $596,784,000. Does the committee agree? Thank you. Committee, we will continue with the departmental summary for Industry Tourism Investment on page 203. Industry Tourism Investment, Operation Expenditures, Total Department, 2021-2022, main estimates, $59,989,000. Does the committee agree? Thank you. Committee, we will continue with the departmental summary for Infrastructure on page 231. Infrastructure Operation Expenditures, Total Department, 2021-2022, main estimates, $278,894,000. Does the committee agree? Thank you. Committee, we will continue with the departmental summary for Justice on page 271. Justice Operations, Total Department, 2021-2022, main estimates, $133,753,000. Does the committee agree? Thank you. Committee, we will continue with the departmental summary for Lands on page 307. Lands Operation Expenditures, Total Department, 2021-2022, main estimates, $22,425,000. Does the committee agree? Thank you. Committee, we will continue with the departmental summary for Municipal and Community Affairs on page 327. Municipal and Community Affairs, Operations, Expenditures, Total Department, 2021-2022, main estimates, $121,132,000. Does the committee agree? Thank you. Committee, we will continue with the departmental summary for Municipal and Community Affairs on page 327. Municipal and Community Affairs, Operation Expenditures, Total Department, 2021-2022, main estimates, $121,132,000. Does the committee agree? Thank you. Committee, we will continue with the departmental summary for the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation on page 369. Please note that Northwest Territories Housing Corporation is an information item and will not be voted on. Does committee agree with this? Concludes our consideration of the N.W.T. Housing Corporation? Agreed. Does the committee agree that this concludes consideration of table document 286-19 bracket 2? Mr. Noren?
Mr. Chair, I move that consideration of table document 286-19 bracket 2, main estimate 2021-2022 be now concluded and that table document 286-19-2 be reported and recommended as ready for further consideration in formal session through the form of an appropriation bill. Mr. Chair.
Mr. Noren? The motion is in order. To the motion? Questions being called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Abstentions? The motion is carried. Table document 286-19 bracket 2 will be reported as ready for consideration in formal session through the form of an appropriation bill. We will have a 5-minute break. Hold back to order. Order, please. Committee, we have agreed to consider Committee Report 18-19, Bracket 2, Report on Motion 5-19, Bracket 2, Referral of Point of Privilege raised by a member for Montfouille on March 10th, 2020. I will go to the Chair of the Standing Committee on Rules and Procedures for any opening comments. Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Legislative Assembly makes interpreters available in most official languages when members are sitting in the chamber. On March 10, 2020, a Tlicho interpreter was not available due to a last-minute cancellation. The interpreter scheduled but had to cancel for personal reasons. The member for Montfouille, Mr. Lafferty, rose on a point of privilege. He said the lack of interpretation impeded or prevented him from performing his parliamentary functions as a member and asked the Speaker to adjourn the proceedings. The Speaker took the matter under advisement and the proceedings continued. On March 11, 2020, when a Tlicho interpreter was available, the Speaker heard debate on the matter of privilege. Following debate, the Speaker ruled that the matter did raise a question of privilege. He entertained motions on the ruling, and Motion 5-19, Bracket 2 was referred to the Committee on Rules and Procedures for consideration. On October 15, 2020, committee sought and received an extension of the review period for an additional 120 days. The purpose of the extension was to allow committee to engage with residents on the use of official languages in this Legislative Assembly. After several in-camera meetings on the topic, committee held a public hearing on November 17, 2020. Committee received a presentation from Monsieur Baptiste Foisy at this hearing. In addition, committee received written submissions from Mr. Jackson Lafferty, member from Montfouille, the Dene Nation, the Gwich'in Tribal Council, the Yellowknife Dene First Nation, and Ms. Mary Rose Sundberg. Je tiens à remercier encore une fois ceux qui ont fait des présentations au comité. Un autre membre souhaitera peut-être parler davantage du rapport. Merci, Mr. Chair. That's the report from the committee.
Thank you. I will now open the floor to general comments on Committee Report 8-19, Bracket 2, Report on Motion 5-19, Bracket 2, Referral of Point of Privilege raised by a member for Montfouille on March 10, 2020. Do any members have general comments? Mr. Norn?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I remember saying, when we first got elected about a year and a half ago, you try to figure out, what our record of proceedings are going to look like way down the road, when people look back through our archives and whatnot, and what languages are being used. And, I'm hoping for down the road, our elders tell us to think ahead several generations, and I think this is just one of those things as well, to think about that. When we speak our language in here, we want to hear that echoed in history, no matter what language we're speaking in here. It could be, French, English, Tlicho, Denisontlina, and so on, I think it's important that we always try to accommodate our listeners out there that don't have English as their first language, and I'm hoping that we could move forward with this and in a positive manner, and and really promote our languages. Our language is powerful medicine. My great grandmother Setsena, she used to tell me that. It's like strong medicine, it echoes in history, and I'm hoping that, again, like I said before, we get some support here, and support our interpreters, I think, I kudos to all our interpreters here in the booths right now doing this really, really important work, because, we can't function without them. And I'm hoping that we can give them all the supports we can and to give supports to those who follow their footsteps. Yeah, that's all I have to say for now with the opening comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Noren. Any further comments? Mr. Lafferty?
Merci, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, do you see?
Mr. Chair, I will be speaking my language, but today what we're talking about is that the Legislative Assembly, whenever we have a meeting, we have the interpreters available. When we're talking our language, and also we are known to be, there are 11 official languages here in the Northwest Territories. One of the language that I'm speaking is the Clinchon. Whenever we have a meeting, I always speak my language. And one of the other things, but that is why today, when I sit here, the rules and procedures, the committee, I'd like to say thank you to the committees. When we talked about those, even though sometimes we may be a little upset, but to show the respect to each other. That's one of the reasons why at that time I haven't really spoke. Speaker, when he made up the rule, I could have spoke further. I knew, because if I continued to speak at that time, nobody would have understood what I was saying. But to show the respect, I want to show the respect. And I know that they were going to postpone it, and I knew that at that time I just did. But then, Mr. Chair, when we look at this, of how to go forward, so we always have a word up front. Whenever we talk about those kind of things, sometimes there could be some incidents. And there are times I like to thank all the interpreters that are here, that are hanging on to their language. If it wasn't for them, maybe there could have been a misinterpretation whenever there's no interpreters available. If the speaker knows there's no interpreters available, they should stop the meeting. I want to speak. At that time, it's just like I was cut off because there was no interpreters. Because our language should be number one. Our language should be there. At that time, it wasn't like that for me. At that time, it's just like when I was speaking Clinchon, it's like I was cut off. And that I was so upset, so I walked out of here at that time. And Mr. Chair, I'm just saying, don't let this happen again. This motion that is here now, we will talk about all on this motion. But then, once the chair speaks on it, the motion will be there. So we should have put something very powerful in place. So whenever in the future, whenever there is any interpreters that are not available, let's seriously take into consideration. If the interpreters are not available, so we should just at that time there's not only me, but then in the future here, when we look around the table, I want each and every one of us to speak our language, 19 official language that we have here. There are times that I'm the only one, but my friend here, Steve Noren, speaks his language once in a while. Sometimes O'Reilly speaks the French language, but I'm most of the time, I'd like to, every day, whenever we have a meeting, I always try to speak my language. So at that time, even though the members some members didn't like, but then I like to say this committee report, the recommendation that's put in place of how we're going to go forward. So Mr. Chair, that's all I may have for now. So the things we have, just try to make it stronger. Whoever speaks their language, let's encourage them to do so. So the speaker, so it will be up to the speaker. The motion that is there now, I will talk to the motion later. That's all I have for now. The committee, the report has been done. I'd like to say thank you of how we're going to go forward. Mussy.
Thank you. Are there any further general comments? Seeing no further comments, member for Frame Lake.
Mussy, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, just a couple of things. I neglected to thank the interpreters that do such tremendous work for us here in the Assembly. And I've known some of them for many years and have great confidence in their ability to help us understand each other a lot better. So I neglected to thank them. And I also wanted to thank the member from Holmesway for bringing this matter forward, because I think it's going to push us to the next level now in terms of making sure that we properly recognize and implement the use of official languages in this Assembly. And I think we've come up with a variety of recommendations here that'll help us do that, right from how we can improve our operations today to policy moving forward. We're not going to be where we may need to be after another couple of years, but this is going to head us in a much better direction. So with that, Mr. Chair, I move that this committee recommends that the rules of the Legislative Assembly be amended to clearly state the right to use any official language when speaking in the Assembly, and further that this right necessarily implies the right to be understood by those members who do not speak that language, and furthermore that the rules of the Legislative Assembly be amended to reflect the right of members to receive interpretation in any official language. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The motion is in order. To the motion, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just very briefly, it's hard to believe that the members have the right to use any official language in the House as a result of the Official Languages Act, but it's not actually recognized or incorporated into our rules. So this will make sure that the rules reflect the law. And so it's an important motion, and I expect everybody's going to vote in favor of this. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that this committee recommends that the rules of the Legislative Assembly be amended to clearly state that documents in any official language may be tabled in the Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? The motion is carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that this committee recommends that simultaneous interpretation of committee proceedings into any official language should be made available to members or witnesses appearing before committee within a 1 week notice, and further that the availability of this service should be communicated clearly with members and any witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The motion is in order. To the motion. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just very quickly, we do a lot of committee work behind the scenes here, and we take bills on the road and so on, and certainly it was a practice in the last Assembly, and I expect it's going to be the practice in this Assembly, that whenever we go outside of Yellowknife, particularly to the smaller communities, that we make it clear that anyone who wants to speak to the committee can use any of the official languages. The 1 week notice that we suggested here is just to make sure that we are prepared and we can offer that service when we go outside of Yellowknife, and even in Yellowknife if someone requires interpretation. So this is about changing the way we start to do some of our business a little bit and making it clear that we're going to offer this on an ongoing basis moving forward. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. To the motion. Mr. Lafferty.
Mr. Chair, just short, just want to thank the committee for highlighting this. A week notice. There's, as members of the Legislative Assembly, there's various committee meetings, and to some degree it's expected that you speak the, English language in these meetings. But there are times where individuals speak their language, but this will clearly lays out the groundwork. If we're given a week's notice, we can speak our language in the committee meetings, teleconference meetings, and I'm not sure how that's going to work, but I'm just glad to see that it's in part of the policy now. So, Masi.
Thank you. To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I move that this committee recommends that the Legislative Assembly increase efforts to provide interpretation into regionally appropriate official languages when standing and special committees hold public meetings in communities outside of the capital. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion is carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that this committee recommends, should a situation arise in the future where interpretation is not available for a language being spoken in the Assembly, that the Speaker gives strong consideration to a recess in or adjournment of proceedings until such a time as adequate interpretation can be provided. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The motion is in order. To the motion. Mr. Norn.
Masi Cho, Mr. Chair, when we did some of our committee deliberations and heard some of the feedback from, from the public, one thing that was brought up was having some on-call interpreters. I think it's really important we have a good pool to draw from, and also, making sure that the right training is provided, working, having those supports in. So I just thought I'd speak to that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion is carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Mr. Chair, I move that this committee recommends that the Speaker and Board of Management develop a rights-based official languages policy for the Legislative Assembly, and that the policy come into effect prior to the end of this Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The motion is in order. To the motion. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So the idea behind this motion is that we do need to have a policy moving forward that better recognizes and incorporates the use of all the official languages in the way that we conduct our work and business here in the Assembly. And there's a number of suggestions in the report itself, and I'm not going to go over those, but it does involve things like making sure that we have backup interpreters on call, and that there is basically a plan for stepwise improvement of the use of official languages across all of the work that we do here at the Legislative Assembly. And I think that's a really key thing. So I hate to put all of this on the Board of Management. They've got a lot of other work on their plates, of course, but we do need to develop a policy in this area. And I think what we've also recommended is that this come back to us before the end of this Assembly so we can keep moving this in the right direction. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? The motion is carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I move that this committee recommends that the suggestions made on pages 10 and 11 of Committee Report 8-19(2) be investigated by the Office of the Speaker, the Board of Management, and the Office of the Clerk in an effort to make immediate improvements in the provision of official languages services. And further, if any of these suggestions are found to not be feasible at present, a plan to realize these outcomes be included in the official languages policy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The motion is in order. To the motion, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I'm not going to read what's on pages 10 and 11, but just to refresh members' memory and for those that may be listening, you know, there are some immediate changes that we can make, and we've started to do some of this where we try to make sure that we have interpretation available for the entire sitting day, and that there's at least a couple of interpreters available. And we're going to look at including statistics around use of official languages in the House in future annual reports from the Legislative Assembly, making sure that some of our basic documents are made available in all the official languages. It's things like the votes and proceedings, the orders of the day, that kind of thing. And that we also consider upgrading our audio and video equipment to make sure that we can broadcast and stream all of the official languages on an ongoing basis. So those are the sorts of things that this recommendation is really aimed at improving. Some immediate operational changes to help us improve the use of official languages right away. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion is carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I move that this committee recommends that the Standing Committee on Government Operations consider the issues of interpreter and translator training and accreditation and the possibility of a future Government of the Northwest Territories Languages Bureau in the context of its review of the Official Languages Act. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The motion is in order. To the motion. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Those of us that have been around for a while may remember when we used to have a Languages Bureau, and it was quite an operation. There was probably 40, 50 staff there that were available and doing work in all the official languages and developing curriculum, all kinds of great work. Unfortunately, we don't have that capacity anymore, or it's still there perhaps in different forms, but that issue was raised with us as well as the need for better interpreter training and accreditation. That was raised to us in the written submissions, verbal submissions, and it was really something kind of beyond the scope of the work of the Rules and Procedures Committee, but certainly perfectly within the purview of the Government Operations Committee when they conduct their review of the Official Languages Act. So we felt it important that we don't lose those issues, concerns that were raised with us. They're captured in the report, and now they can also be considered by, and what this motion will do is make sure that they are given to the Government Operations Committee to carefully consider, and people, of course, will be welcome to make their own presentations to that committee at the appropriate time. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. To the motion, Mr. Lafferty.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I too would like to emphasize the importance of having a translator training and accreditation for up and coming future governments. The committee has heard from various stakeholders, interpreters, language specialists, even in this House. On numerous occasions, I raised that issue of the importance of having qualified people to be trained, similar to what the Language Bureau that Mr. O'Reilly was referring to. It was a a big machine back then, and we don't have that right now, unfortunately. But as we move forward, I'd like to see more of interpreters qualified that we can pick from. Less of, as Mr. Norn alluded to, a list of interpreters lined up. So I like to again re-emphasize that the high importance of having a trained interpreters and translators, so we can have qualified people in this building in all official languages as possible. Mr. Chair, I just in closing, this is one of the recommendations that was brought forward by some of the interpreters as well. And I attended last week's language training as well. There again, it was stressed by language specialists that we need qualified, trained language interpreters and translators. So the message is out there, it's real, and the government needs to start listening. This is a real issue. We're losing our language. The Gwich'in is losing their language. N.W.T is losing their language big times. And fortunately, traditional language is strong, but we have a young generation that do not speak the language. So now's the time to get our act together as government and reinforce that the importance of investing into our language. So this will be a continuation of our push, and I'm glad the report reflects on that, Mr. Chair. Masi.
Thank you. To the motion? Question's been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion is carried. Thank you, committee. Do you agree that you have concluded consideration of Committee Report 8-19, bracket 2? Thank you, committee. We have concluded consideration of Committee Report 8-19, bracket 2, Standing Committee on Rules and Procedures Report on Motion 5-19, bracket 2, referral of point of privilege raised by a member from Mofwee on March 10th, 2020. Mr. Norn?
Mr. Chair, I move that the chair rise and report progress.
There is a motion on the floor to report progress. The motion is in order and non-debatable. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion is carried. I will now rise and report progress.
May I have the report, please, member for Haver South.
Mr. Speaker, your committee has been considering table document 286-19, bracket 2, main estimates 2021-2022, and committee report 8-19, bracket 2, and would like to report progress with 9 motions carried. That committee report 8-19, bracket 2 is concluded. That consideration of table document 286-19, bracket 2 is concluded, and that the House concur in those estimates, and that an appropriation bill be based thereon be introduced without delay. And, Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the Committee of Whole be concurred with. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Haver South. Do we have a seconder? Member for N.W.T. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is carried. Thank you. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Minister responsible for education, culture, and employment.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the honourable member for Nuvik-Boot Lake, that Bill 20, an act to amend the Employment Standards Act, be read for the third time. And Mr. Speaker, I request a recorded vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister. Motion is in order to the motion. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I do have some remarks to make on this bill. It proposes 2 sets of changes to the Employment Standards Act. Unpaid emergency leave is created, and then there's waivers for group termination advance notice requirements. The Employment Standards Act is a significant legislation that tries to balance workers' rights versus employers' interests. I want to thank the Committee on Social Development, Standing Committee on Social Development for their work. They found a better balance by clarifying the process for employers to seek waivers from group notice termination requirements. They also clarified the process that'll be used, and the notice of decision to reduce or eliminate group termination notice now has to be posted in a workplace and given to each employee. I still have major concerns, though, with this bill. In terms of the timing, I suggest to the former Minister of Justice an omnibus, a COVID bill, to deal with issues such as these. And I did that back in April of 2020, but it never really happened. So this bill only came forward in November of 2020, only after a federal requirement for emergency leave as part of the Safe Restart Agreement. And on March the 12th, the minister said that the bill, I'll just use his words, that followed correspondence from, quote, an industry lobbyist group, end of quote. So this bill, in my view, took too long to be developed and was not really perhaps even at our own initiative. The minister admitted that there was no public consultation in creating this bill, which I and others expect when making changes to the Employment Standards Act. The substantive problems with the bill, I want to speak to those, Mr. Speaker. The emergency leave is unpaid. I don't think this creates an incentive to encourage self-isolation. We heard in debate that some other jurisdictions actually even have more generous sick leave provisions in their Employment Standards Act, like the Yukon. I think that there should have been more effort to look at how to make emergency leave paid, and that could have been done through some kind of arrangement or split among the federal government, perhaps, N.W.T, employers, and even employees. But I don't think that work was done either. I want to speak now to the waivers from group termination notice requirements, and I think the way that it's been presented in the bill is quite problematic. I couldn't even get the minister to admit a couple of weeks ago that workers will potentially lose weeks of paid employment if this bill passes, and I certainly expect that it will. This really shifts the burden from employers to employees, and I don't think that that's fair when it comes to group terminations. There may be some situations where this may be warranted, but this bill doesn't provide enough guidance or even strike the right kind of balance between employees and employers' interests. These changes are not the same as some other jurisdictions, how they've decided to try to handle group notice terminations, or group termination notices. In the federal legislation, there's a mediated process where people try to sit down and look at ways of avoiding group terminations. We don't have that with this legislation. The process for waivers is still not clear. The onus should be on the employer, and I think that should be done through a simple application process. As the bill stands now, the onus is on the Employment Standards Officer. So we downloaded that responsibility onto the Employment Standards Officer. So number one, they have to figure out whether an employer is actually providing proper notice, and if not, then they have to figure out whether the employer meets the requirements for a waiver, and I believe that this will cause unnecessary delays. So for all these reasons, this bill does not provide for adequate protection of workers' rights and the public interest. The balance is tipped too far in favor of employers, and I will not be supporting it. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Motion is in order to the motion. The member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would just like to suggest that if anyone would like to know how the proceedings on this bill went, that they check back through the record. I do not agree with my colleague's statements, and I will be supporting this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. The minister has requested a recorded vote. All those in favor, please rise.
The member for Hay River North, the member for Great Slave, the member for Cam Lake, the member for Decho, the member for Yellowknife North, the member for Montfouy, the member for Nahende, the member for Satu, the member for Nuvik Bootleg, the member for Hay River South, the member for Thabacha, the member for Nunakput, the member for Tunade Welade, the member for Yellowknife South, the member for Range Lake, the member for Yellowknife Centre.
All those opposed, please rise.
The member for Range Lake, Frame Lake. The member.
All those abstaining, please rise. Just 1 second here. Vote 16 in favor, 1 opposed, 0 abstentions. The motion is carried. Thank you. Motion is carried. Bill 20 has had third reading. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Yellowknife Centre, that Bill 26, Supplementary Appropriation Act Operations Expenditures, Number 3, 2020-2021, be read for the third time. And, Mr. Speaker, I would request a recorded vote.
Thank you. The Minister. Thank you, Minister. The motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. The Minister has requested a recorded vote. All those in favor, please rise.
The member for Yellowknife South. The member for Range Lake. The member for Yellowknife Centre. The member for Hay River South. The member for Thabacha. The member for Nunakput. The member for Tuniday, Willaday. The member for Nahende. The member for Sawtoo. The member for Inuvik Boot Lake. The member for Hay River North. The member for Great Slave. The member for Cam Lake. The member for Frame Lake. The member for Detcho. The member for Yellowknife North. And the member for Montfouy.
All those opposed, please rise. All those abstaining, please rise. Thank you. The results of the recorded vote, 17 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstentions. The motion is carried. Bill 26 has had third reading. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the honourable member from Inuvik Boot Lake, that Bill 27, Supplementary Appropriation Act's Infrastructure Expenditures Number 3, 2020-2021, be read for the third time. And, Mr. Speaker, I would request a recorded vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. The Minister has requested a recorded vote. All those in favor, please rise.
The member for Yellowknife South. The member for Range Lake. The member for Yellowknife Centre. The member for Hay River South. The member for Thabacha. The member for Nunakput. The member for Tuniday, Willaday. The member for Nahende. The member for Sawtoo. The member for Inuvik Boot Lake. The member for Hay River North. The member for Great Slave. The member for Cam Lake. The member for Frame Lake. The member for Detcho. The member for Yellowknife North. The member for Montfouy.
All those opposed, please rise. All those abstaining, please rise. The results of the recorded vote, 17 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstentions. The motion is carried. Bill 27 has had third reading. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Mr. Clerk, orders of the day.
Orders of the day for Tuesday, March 30th, 2021 at 1:30 p.m. Prayer, minister statements, member statements, recognition of visitors in the gallery, reports of committee on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, returns to oral questions 638-19-2, acknowledgements, oral questions, returns to written questions, replies to the Commissioner's address, petitions, tabling of documents, notices of motion, motions, notices of motion for first reading of bills, first reading of bills, second reading of bills, Bill 24, Bill 25, consideration in Committee of the Whole of bills and other matters, Committee Report 9-19-2, report of Committee of the Whole, third reading of bills, orders of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. This House stands adjourned until Tuesday, March 30th, 2021 at 1:30 p.m.